The city bustled with its usual rhythm. People hurried across crosswalks, taxis honked impatiently, and the air buzzed with conversations. Among the noise and movement, a small girl sat quietly on the sidewalk near a brick wall. Her name was Emily. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her blonde hair was tangled, her dress worn thin, and her shoes looked like they had carried her far too many miles. But instead of begging, Emily was drawing in a battered little notebook with a broken pencil. She sketched carefully, as if the paper in her lap were more precious than gold. Not far away, a tall man in a sharp blue suit walked with steady confidence. His name was Richard Blake, one of the city's most powerful and wealthy men, a billionaire. People often stepped aside when they saw him coming, and whispers always followed him. He had everything anyone could dream of: money, mansions, cars, influence. And yet inside he felt nothing. His life was empty. That morning, Richard was on his way to an important business meeting. But when his eyes landed on the little girl sketching on the ground, something about her stopped him. Unlike the others who walked past, Richard didn't ignore her. He slowed down, studied her for a moment, then crouched beside her. "What are you drawing?" he asked curiously. Emily looked up. Her blue eyes were calm, almost too calm for a child her age. She turned the notebook toward him. On the paper was the outline of a small house. Crooked lines, but full of detail. "Why a house?" Richard asked. Emily hesitated before answering. "Because my mom says one day we'll have one. Right now, we live in a shelter." For a moment, Richard didn't know what to say. He thought of his own lavish properties. The beach villa he rarely visited. The penthouse that sat empty half the year. The countryside mansion filled with furniture no one ever touched. And here was a little girl whose dream was simply a home. Richard's lips curled into a small, almost ironic smile. Something inside him wanted to test her, to see what she would do if temptation stood right in front of her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black credit card, the kind reserved for the ultra-rich. He held it out. "Here," Richard said. "Take this, buy whatever you want." Emily's eyes widened. She stared at the card like it was unreal. Her small fingers twitched nervously. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Richard smirked, nodding. "Of course. Anything you want." Inside, he thought, she'll probably rush to the candy store. Maybe grab some toys or even head toward the clothing shops. Let's see what greed looks like in its purest form. Emily rose to her feet carefully, holding the card as if it were fragile glass. She gave Richard a small, polite nod. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Then she started walking. Not toward the toy shop, not toward the glittering candy display across the street, but somewhere entirely unexpected. Richard frowned, curiosity gripping him, and so he followed. Emily held the shiny black credit card tightly as she walked down the busy street. Richard followed a few steps behind, his sharp shoes tapping the pavement. He was curious, almost entertained, like a man watching a game he had invented. She's going to run into the nearest toy shop, he thought. Maybe she'll grab dolls, candy, or clothes. Children are always greedy when given freedom. But Emily surprised him. She walked right past the candy store. She ignored the toy shop with teddy bears displayed in the window. She didn't even glance at the bright posters of ice cream. Instead, she stopped in front of a small grocery store. Richard frowned. "Really," he muttered under his breath. Emily pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bell above the entrance jingled. Richard followed, slipping his hands into his pockets, curious to see what she would do. Inside, the store smelled of bread and fresh vegetables. Emily walked slowly down the aisles, her little hands brushing over the shelves. She picked up a loaf of bread, then put it carefully into a basket. Next, she chose a carton of milk, a bag of rice, and some beans. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Strange choice," he whispered. "Maybe she's clever. She's buying cheap food so she can save the card for something bigger later." But Emily wasn't done. She walked over to the fruit section. She stared at the apples for a long moment, then gently picked 3 of them. She held them with such care as if they were treasures. At the counter, she asked the cashier shyly, "Can I please get some bananas too? My little brother hasn't eaten any fruit in months." The cashier smiled kindly and nodded. Richard, standing behind her, felt his chest tighten. She placed everything neatly on the counter: bread, rice, milk, beans, apples, bananas. Not a single toy, not a single sweet for herself. The cashier scanned the items and asked, "Credit or debit?" Emily held up Richard's card. "Credit, please." The cashier swiped it, handed her the receipt, and packed the groceries into 2 paper bags. Emily thanked her politely, then struggled to carry the bags, which were almost as big as she was. Richard quickly stepped forward. "Let me help," he offered, reaching for one of the bags. Emily shook her head firmly. "No, thank you, sir, I can carry them. They're for my family." Richard blinked. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Here was a little girl with the power to buy anything in the world, and she chose only food for her family. As she walked out of the store, Richard followed, deep in thought. His plan to expose greed had backfired. Instead, he felt like he was the one being tested. Emily stopped outside the store and set the bags down to adjust her grip. She looked up at Richard with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said. "Tonight my brother and mom will be really happy." Richard stared at her, speechless. For the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost long ago: shame. Outside the grocery store, Emily balanced the 2 paper bags against her small chest. The weight made her stumble a little, but she refused to let Richard help. She looked too proud, too determined. Richard couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Wait," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "Why didn't you buy anything for yourself? You could have had toys, candy, clothes, anything you wanted. Why only food?" Emily stopped. She blinked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his tone. Then she adjusted her grip on the bags and answered softly, "Because I don't need toys right now. My little brother's been hungry for days. My mom is sick and hasn't eaten properly. If they're happy, then I'm happy too." Her words landed like a punch to Richard's chest. He stared at her, speechless, his mind spinning. This wasn't the answer he had expected. He had imagined greed, excitement, selfishness. But instead, this little girl's world revolved around her family's survival. Emily tilted her head, studying him with innocent eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked gently. Richard swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. No, you didn't." For the first time in years, memories from his own childhood rose to the surface. He saw himself as a young boy living in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. His mother used to stretch every coin to feed him, often going without food herself. She had always said the same words Emily just had: "If you are happy, I'm happy." Richard had buried those memories long ago, hiding them behind his empire of wealth. But now, standing on the sidewalk with this little girl, they rushed back like a wave. Emily smiled faintly, shifting the bags again. "My brother loves apples. He's going to be so surprised. He hasn't had one in months." Richard's chest ached. A child should be excited about toys, not apples, he thought bitterly. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower now. "Emily, what if I told you this was a test?" Emily's brows knitted. "A test?" "Yes," Richard admitted. "I gave you my credit card to see what you'd do. Most people would have bought something for themselves. But you thought of your family first." Emily looked down at her worn shoes, almost embarrassed. "That's just what Mom taught me, family first." Her simple words cut deeper than any business deal Richard had ever made. He realized in that moment that this little girl, homeless, hungry, dressed in rags, had more wisdom and heart than he had, despite all his billions. For the first time in a very long while, Richard felt his eyes sting. He quickly turned his face away, pretending to adjust his sleeve. A billionaire crying in the middle of the street wasn't something he wanted the world to see. But inside, something had shifted. Something he didn't even know he had been missing. Emily walked carefully down the street, the 2 grocery bags clutched tightly in her little arms. Her steps were slow but steady. Richard followed a few paces behind, silent, deep in thought. The powerful billionaire who usually commanded boardrooms and owned skyscrapers was now trailing an 8-year-old girl through the city. Something about her drew him in, as if she carried a piece of truth he had long forgotten. After several blocks, Emily turned into a narrow alley. At the end stood a weathered brick building with peeling paint and barred windows. Small sign above the door read, "Hope Haven Shelter." Richard froze. A shelter. Emily pushed the door open with her shoulder and disappeared inside. Richard hesitated for a moment, then followed. The air inside smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. The walls were painted pale yellow but chipped in many places,